Okay. I call this meeting of the Davenport Community School District Board of Directors to order. We'll start with our board priorities. Director Dickman, would you please read those?
I'd be happy to. The Davenport School Board establishes the following priorities to ensure the academic success of all students. Provide leadership and direction to improve the overall learning environment in our classrooms, schools, and district, including the health, safety, security, and happiness of students and staff. And then also to direct and support actions, programs, and activities which reduce the impacts of poverty on our students, their families, and our community.
Thank you. And Director Crumwoody, would you please read our mission and vision statements?
I'd be happy to. Our mission statement: enhance each student's abilities by providing a quality education enriched by our diverse community. And our vision statement: education that challenges conventional thinking, prepares all students to compete in a global society, and inspires our students, our parents, staff, and community to answer the question, what if?
Thank you. Director Kluhl, would you please review our upcoming events?
On July 6th at 5:30 p.m., the Committee of the Whole will meet here in the Jim Hester Boardroom. In addition, on July 7th, the Legislative Advocacy Committee will be meeting in the Jim Hester Executive Boardroom at 3 o'clock. On July 13th at 6 p.m., the regular meeting of the board will be here at the Jim Hester Boardroom, and that will be our only meeting, a regular meeting in July. August 3rd through the 5th, August 3rd at 5:30 p.m. This is written in a most unusual style. August 3rd at 5:30 p.m., the Committee of the Whole will meet here in the Jim Hester Boardroom. August 10th at 6 p.m., regular meeting here in the Jim Hester Boardroom. On the 24th of August, we'll have our regular meeting in the Jim Hester Boardroom, which is the same day as the first day of school. And additionally, tentatively, we have planned at 5 o'clock on the 24th, the first day of school, our ice cream social, when we'll be hosting our legislators. A little different way of doing it this year. We're going to do it before a board meeting in hopes that legislators will actually attend our board meeting following the ice cream social. So that's it for updates on the upcoming events. That's all there is.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to open forum. Open forum is a time for members of the community to give input at a board meeting regarding school district issues or concerns. Individuals who want to speak should fill out an open forum request and give it to the board secretary prior to open forum. The board will not act on any issue presented during open forum if it was not published as an agenda item. The Iowa Open Meetings Law prohibits action on any issue that is not on the agenda. The president will set the amount of time allowed for individuals to speak during open forum. The board asks that no charges or complaints be made against individual employees of the district or community during open forum. Remarks that reflect negatively on the character or motives of any person will be called out of order. We have 3 open forum requests, and if you would come up to the microphone, give us your name and address, and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. And the order will be Clyde Mayfield, Laura, and Guillermo. Excuse me.
May I go after there's a subject?
Sure. Okay. I'll have you go last. Clyde will go last. We'll start with Laura.
Sorry.
I guess not.
He had said that someone told him he could get 6 minutes, so I told him that you would consider it. I'm sorry I didn't tell you before the meeting. So I told him that usually that's a request that's made before the meeting, so I told him it would probably only be, but he did ask if he could get
Well, let me let me address that then. So apparently, Scott, you were under the impression that you would have more than 2 minutes.
No, I was just told that I got 2 minutes and that if I asked that this issue had to do with the health, safety, and welfare of the students, that I might be able to speak for 6 minutes.
Okay, that's not a normal. Normally, what happens is that the president gives a normal amount of time to everybody to be fair. However, there are allowances if you'll contact the board secretary or me prior to the meeting, and then I can make different arrangements. So, and we have the open forum at every single board meeting, every single open board meeting, other than our committee of the whole.
I tried to get that information and I wasn't able
Okay.
to know that now.
Okay, I apologize for that. I just want to try and be fair. So, so it's going to be approximately 2 minutes. Okay. So we'll start with Laura and Guillermo Tano, Scott Cyril, and Clyde Mayfield. So we'll start with Laura. Excuse me? Oh. Okay. Then she will not be here. Scott, you're up. Come on up to the microphone. Give us your name and address.
Yes, my name is Scott Searle. I live at 519 West 16th Street, approximately 12 houses from J.B. Young. I've talked with a lot of people. I've got a lot of signatures and had a lot of conversations. I formed a petition because I would like the basketball hoops to be put back up at J.B. I found out that they are the only 3 hoops in the entire district that have been removed. In our neighborhood, a lot of kids don't have the financial ability to get involved in extracurricular sports and activity, and this gives them something to do. I spoke with a lot of people, got 190 signatures on the petition. 8 of them are business owners on the Hilltop. 5 of them let me have their petitions in their business, and those businesses are within 100 feet of, maybe 200 feet of JB's parking lot. I don't believe that all kids need to be punished for the actions of a small few. I understand that there was some issues with some bad behavior up at the playground, but that can be dealt with, I believe. At other schools, there are signs on the playground that says playground closes at dusk. At JB, there is not. Now children have to cross Brady, Locust, and Harrison to get to Madison to play basketball, when we have a perfectly good, safe hoop and basketball area right there at JB. I've heard both sides of the story, but I just don't believe that all kids should be punished for the actions of a small few. And these kids, I see them walking around my neighborhood bouncing a basketball. There'll be kids up at JB during the day shooting their basketball at the backboard with the white square, trying to make baskets. I also believe that the hoops should be actually raised, because they're on a thing where they can be raised. When they're lower like that, that encourages dunking, it encourages bad behavior. That's when a lot of fights start. That's when a lot of things happen. I'm not asking for extra patrols. I'm just asking for when the police drive up and down the street, they just shine their spotlight. If there was that sign, they could get them out of there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Scott. Next, Clyde Mayfield.
Thank you. Clyde Mayfield, as you said, I was one of those people that felt that what was going on at JB Park Playground / was
Excuse me, Clyde. We need your address also, please.
430 West 16th,
Okay, thank you.
of course, in Davenport. I'll start again. Yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
that's okay. Anyway, I was one of those people that had a problem with the hoops being there. Back 15 years ago when the hoops were removed, I had spoke with the principal then, and because of all the activity, negative activity that we were having, he chose to leave them up till 4 o'clock when the school was out. Then the hoops were down. We had no problems with the hoops up to then. Recently, they were put up permanently to be there all the time. We've had nothing but problems since then. We've had a riot on 16th Street. Basically, kids fighting over at JB. It went way over into 16th Street. We have businesses there that affects. But I don't want you to think that I'm against kids having things to do, because I'm 100% for it. I've worked with Davenport Central. What we have down there is a youth sports program. And at that youth sports program, we have basketball, football, wrestling, you name it. So it's not that I'm trying to stop kids from having something to do. I'm encouraging it. I applaud Scott for encouraging it. But it has to be supervised. And that's the very reason why the hoops were not left up there on a consistent basis, because kids fight, others get hurt, and it needs to be discussed more in depth. I do think that there needs to be a sit-down hearing and talk about what has been going on, how it's affected other people, and what we can do not only for the neighbors, but also for the kids. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Clyde. And thank you, both of you, Scott and Clyde. This is really important, and the board really appreciates, and our community appreciates, you bringing these issues to our attention, and we appreciate your advocacy.
I left my petition with Mary.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Move on to board reports. Are there any board reports?
Mr. President.
Director Crumwoody.
Yes, I'd like to give a short report on our school board election workshop, which was held last Thursday evening here in the boardroom, and it was conducted by Director DeFaw, Mary Carruthers, our board secretary, and myself. This was a very first time that we think this sort of thing has happened in the Davenport schools, and we encouraged people who are interested in running for the school board to come forward, and we spent about an hour and 40 minutes with folks who were interested in being candidates, and we had 7 people step forward indicating that they had an interest in being a candidate for school board. And we had really three different topics that we covered. I covered basically introductions and the operations of the school board and the responsibilities of the school board. And Director DeFaw, she talked about responsibilities and board leadership roles and knowing and understanding law and legal responsibilities. Director DeFaw has been on the policy committee for a number of years and talked about that. And then we ended up with our board secretary, Mary Carruthers, spent time talking about the nomination papers, how to complete those nomination papers, all the legal responsibilities and being a candidate for the school board, timelines, dates, and all the forms that need to be completed. So we thought it was a great experience. I also understand that it's one of the first times in the state that any school board has done this. So I think it's hats off to our board for doing that. So I'll leave it up to Nikki or Mary if they want to add anything. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Any additional reports? Director DeFaw.
I'd just like to share that the North High School Thespian Troupe made it safely to Lincoln, Nebraska today, and will be performing their studio cut of Children of a Lesser God at the International Thespian Festival. Don't say that 3 times fast. They were the only troupe in Iowa to be selected to perform this year, so we're very proud of them.
Thank you. Any additional reports? All right. Well, thank you very much. We'll move on to the consent agenda. May I have a motion?
Mr. President,
Director Crumwoody.
I move the consent agenda as presented by the administration.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote. Director Cromedy?
Yes.
Director Dickman?
Yes.
Director DeFau?
Yes.
Director Kluhl?
Yes.
Director Hayes?
Yes.
Director Snyder?
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion regarding approval of bills?
Mr. President,
Director Kluhl.
I move that the board approve the following resolution as recommended by the administration for adoption of bills. The resolution is as follows. Resolved that all claims presented to the board, having been duly certified as correct by the secretary, reviewed by the administration and board members, and they are hereby audited and allowed as just claims and warrants drawn on the treasury for the several amounts. Further resolved, the payment of claims and salaries be approved as presented for the period of June 4th, 2015 through June 17th, 2015.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, we'll call for the vote. Director Kluhl?
Yes.
Director Hayes?
Yes.
Director Dickman?
Yes.
Director DeFau?
Yes.
Director Cromedy?
Yes.
Director Snyder?
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. Move on to the superintendent report.
Thank you, Mr. President. A little bit later, we're going to be talking about the budget for next year, reviewing what we know about what's happening in the state, and just try to give a thumbnail of what the next 2 years looks like. I'd like to give a recap of what happened with our move for equity in the legislature, and also to talk about what I consider is my responsibility moving forward. So this is a prepared statement. On March 9th, I made a statement concerning my intention to enact budget decisions to turn around the more than 40-year state practice, which provides less per pupil funding for our students than in other districts. At the time, I indicated that I was ready to face the serious consequences resulting from exceeding state-imposed allowable spending limits. The result of my stand was an outpouring of support and interest from students and parents, the Davenport community, and our governing board. There were also expressions of encouragement from around the state and nation. At the legislature, the publicity surrounding the Davenport Declaration prompted interest and resulted in a study bill being written in the Senate. That action gave us hope, and our board's Legislative Advocacy Committee worked diligently, investing time and effort in contacting legislators, including a visit to the Capitol, to meet with the governor and legislative leaders from both parties. Everyone needs to know that representatives of the board, along with a lobbyist from the Urban Education Network, were relentless in trying to garner support for legislation which would have permitted districts such as ours to bring per pupil spending to the same levels as the highest districts in the state, using only our cash reserves. At one point during the legislative process, it was determined that the funding equality bill would not continue in the Senate. Subsequently, a similar bill was crafted in the House. With the legislative session over for the year, we all know that neither the House nor Senate had the will to take action to provide a short or long-term solution to the funding situation. Apparently, our legislature is in a 2-year biennium session, and every bill which was introduced this year passes on to the next year of the session. So in theory, legislation to temporarily address the long-standing inequality will again be considered in 2016. I cannot find the appropriate words to express my disappointment, dismay, and alarm at the inability, unwillingness of the Iowa legislature to approve a statute addressing the long-standing practice of discrimination in education funding equality. Here is the bottom line. There will be no legislative relief to allow this district to legally spend the additional $175 per student next school year. This is the amount required so that Davenport students would be worth the same as other students in the state. The legislators have spoken. Students in Davenport and hundreds of other districts are worth less than students in the top funded districts in the state according to per pupil spending. I wish to thank our Davenport students who led and inspired us through the campaign. The governing board, which stood strongly behind the principle of equality in funding. The district parents and employees who rallied energetically behind the effort. The Davenport community, including political leaders and organizations, which went on record to support the value of students. Our legislative delegation, one of whom is here tonight, which provided various degrees of leadership and support to raise the awareness of the situation. The state legislative leaders who listened to our presentations, took our calls, read our emails, and admitted that changes needed to be made. I want to personally apologize to the activists, students, parents, and community members for not taking my stand in prior school years or earlier this year to give us more time to work through the complicated, laborious, confusing legislative process. I have some questions I'd like to ask every Iowa legislator. 1, did you know that the inequality of student pupil spending has been part of the state spending formula for over 40 years? 2, if you are a legislator who knew about the decades-old inequality of student funding, why have you never done anything about it? And lastly, 3, if you are a legislative leader who did not support bringing one of the study bills on student equality of spending to the Senate and House floor, what is your reasoning? I am curious about political priorities. A gas tax increase was passed in record time with almost no controversy and little discussion. The rationale was that the problem of highway infrastructure and maintenance had been ignored for too long, and it was time to act. I wonder why the unacceptable disparity in per pupil funding that has gone on for 40 years, disadvantaging students throughout the state, was not viewed with equal enthusiasm as fixing bridges and roads. Of course, road upgrades are about safety and commerce, but equal funding for each and every student in the state goes to the heart of equal opportunity. Withholding funds from needy students is a matter of health, safety, and security in districts such as Davenport. It has been suggested that the main reason why the legislative fix to promote funding equality did not find its way to the light of day to be voted on because it threatened property taxes. Apparently, although the proposed bill would not have permitted districts to increase property tax levies, some legislators held the opinion that since reserve cash accounts originally came from property taxes, spending reserves funds would be like spending property tax resources. I understand about being fiscally responsible. As a superintendent, I enacted conservative fiscal practices for over 18 years, reducing district operating budgets by over $30 million. I respect the protection of property taxes. This year I recommended to the school board that we reduce the property tax levy. I take seriously my responsibility to propose budgets and plans which respect our tax base. I humbly suggest that equality in the way we value every student trumps the unwavering adherence to rejecting every measure which has any relationship, no matter how remote, to property taxes. In my view, reversing discrimination that has taken place over scores of years, therefore depriving students of an equal chance to succeed, should be more important than uncompromising partisan politics. In my opinion, one of the most important planks of every political platform has to be equality of educational opportunity. I am not an elected official, but I cannot understand how an Iowa senator or representative can turn their back on the temporary solution for a funding process which has institutionalized gross discrimination against thousands of Iowa students. I maintain, and have told everyone who would listen, that the legislative temporary fix would have been fair, logical, and caused no harm. I am publicly repeating my declaration that our students in Davenport are as worthy of financial support as any student in the state. Our students need to know that their superintendent values them and is declaring to every other district, to the governor, and to every legislator that our students are worthy of equal state funding. I intend to spend up to $175 per student more than the state funding formula allows. $175 is the difference in what Davenport is allowed to spend according to state's funding formula and what other districts with the highest per pupil spending are allowed to spend per student. Next year, our students will not be worth less. As long as I am permitted to be superintendent of this district until the state addresses the funding disparity, I will continue to spend more than the state allocation, which is governed by statute. I will no longer accept the state-imposed and state-condoned inequality of student funding for Davenport Community School District. I wish I had faith in a legislative system which recognizes and corrects blatant injustices. Unfortunately, what I observed in this year's action shocked me, and I have almost completely lost hope and the government's ability to erase the funding inequality. I am told to be patient, but my students, our students, cannot wait. Accordingly, in addition to my action to exceed the state spending authority, I think it is prudent to begin to investigate possible legal action against the state. Since the 1970s, Davenport Community School District has been shortchanged through the discriminatory funding formula to the tune of an accumulated $142 million. That is $142 million which could have been spent introducing additional quality programs and services for students. Imagine the good that those additional resources could have accomplished. Ponder the damage which the lack of funds may have allowed. We are a district with a 63% free and reduced lunch enrollment. Our need cannot wait for legislative processes and endless study groups. Our needs are now. So I'm looking for legal advice. Who has standing to sue the state? What are the steps? What are the costs? How do we fund it? I wonder about the power of scores of districts in a lawsuit to recover the total funds lost from a flawed funding formula which has been in place for over 40 years. I also want to challenge some of our motivated students and talented teachers to study the Iowa Constitution and determine whether it does or does not support equality and educational opportunity. If the state constitution does not now guarantee equality of funding, an opportunity exists for the Davenport Community School District to lead the way yet again to seek such a constitutional amendment. In conclusion, as a school system and community, we should be proactive in attacking the problem of inequality of funding. From what I have seen this year, we cannot rely solely on the political process. We must continue to act boldly and with conviction. And my final comments are meant for all of our students. Your education is worth everything to me. I will use my time and energy to get the state of Iowa to recognize the importance of equal funding for all students. Thank you very much for the time. Nothing else to report.
Thank you. Well, that was quite a bit. Okay, we'll move on to other items requiring action. May I have a motion for approval for the annual membership to the IASB?
Mr. President,
Director Crumwitty.
I recommend that the board approve annual membership dues to the Iowa Association of School Boards for $11,400.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Director Crumwitty?
Yes, I would just like to say that I think following up from our superintendent's presentation, I think this is a most critical year that we are on board with the Iowa School Board Association. I think we need to work diligently with the Iowa School Board Association and other school districts around the state to work with our legislators to get something done about this funding issue. And as my role on the Legislative Resolutions Committee, even though I will not be on the Davenport School Board, I will be on the AA Board to follow through and to continue on that Resolutions Committee. And it will be my goal to make that a top resolution for all districts in the state of Iowa.
Director Dickman?
I'd like to think of the majority of our spending as a district as more of an investment. And I think that this is another different kind of investment, that we are investing in being part of a group, and that being part of that group will help us to advocate for what we think is best for Iowa students.
Anybody else? Director Snyder.
I have a question for anybody who's involved in the legislative side of it, maybe Director Crumwitty. What has the Iowa Association of School Boards done this past year that has shown support for our initiative and funding?
They certainly have, Director Snyder. In fact, shortly after we on the Legislative Advocacy Committee started some of our activities, I personally contacted Lisa Bartusik, who's head of the Iowa School Board Association. I talked to our attorneys, and they also provided us with a listing of all the school districts that were in the very same type of situation that we were in, which helped us to better communicate with school districts around the state, because we had that information and the funding information, and that was provided by the IASB. So yes, they were supportive, and I think that we have an opportunity. I think, like I said, I think we're going to have to work diligently with other folks on the resolutions committee. We're going to have to work with other folks throughout the state to get this message across and get their support, because our superintendent just apologized that of the lateness of this issue. We have from now until next session to work really hard with that organization, and hopefully we can get something done.
Thank you. As I said, I'm not involved in the legislative side of it that much, and I have seen a lot more support from the UEN that's been open than the IASB, but since you're more involved in that, I completely trust your leadership on that, so thank you.
Any additional discussion?
Sure.
Director Kluhl.
Director Snyder, I have to say that your observation is correct about not seeing as much help and assistance from IASB as UEN. And frankly, I'll say this, I don't think that we in the past have utilized IASB to the capacity of funding that we paid to them every year. IASB does do a lot of work undercover, things that we're not aware of. Representative Winkler, I don't know if you attended the foundation formula. It was a 5-year review. I think you were in that meeting, and they did a lot of work to prepare a study, came prepared to address the issues of inequality in the funding formula. That was not their primary issue, but that was one of the issues that they brought forward to the committee. So they did quite a bit of work there that was really not real visible to board members. But I will say that this coming year we will be making more use of IASB. We'll leverage their resources just like we did UEN, which we'll be voting on next, to make sure that we get our $11,400 worth of effort from IASB.
Any additional discussion? I have to say a couple of things. Over the past year, there have been so many things going on with all of this, with the IASB, UEN, our legislature, our legislators. And I wrote a letter to myself, and it was called Disillusionment. And in that letter, I was talking about, I had always thought that our voice, our voices, my voice was meaningful. And over the past year, I'd say that I came to think that maybe it isn't. When I think of, and I talked about all of these different organizations, the IASB I think can be very helpful, and I think is very helpful in some ways. Certainly we got into the fray a little bit late legislatively, and probably with the IASB also, because it establishes its priorities, I think, in November. Is that correct? Oh, in June. Oh.
We have our first meetings in June, and the priorities are pretty much established by September, before the convention. The convention is in November.
Right, and that's where I thought the priorities existed. So if it's June, it sounds like they're probably all close to being set.
No. The Iowa School Board Association will be sending, which they do every year, asking us what our priorities are, and that's what I was saying before. I think, and I won't be here probably when this happens, but I would strongly suggest that this board have one priority, and that's the funding issue. And that's the message I would like to get across to the Resolutions Committee. This is our main resolution in the state of Iowa this year.
And I appreciate and I support what you're doing. The difficulty is that the IASB represents 330 some districts, I think, in the state, and a lot of those districts are the haves, and they aren't in the same situation that we're in. It makes it difficult for an organization like IASB to bring something like this particular priority to be the priority. So I'm hopeful and faithful to this idea that it will happen, because it almost has to happen. And so I think for that singular reason, I intend to support this motion. Any other discussion?
Just a short follow-up.
Director Kluhl.
I think ISB is being pushed in ways that they have not been since the disillusionment that they had with the their director and CFO. I think now, in addition to the Urban Education Network putting some demands on them to take actions, there's now a rural association district that is also becoming very vocal. In fact, President Johansson and I went down and presented a panel discussion to the Rural Association on equity in the funding formula. So I think IASB is in the process of making some changes. They have now some leadership that we all support, those of us that have been on the Leadership Academy at IASB. And I think now is the opportunity for us to be involved in shaping the direction that they change. So I agree with you that I've not been entirely impressed, but part of that is because we have not asked.
Director Crumwitty.
And I just want to follow up with that. That's absolutely right. I don't think we've used the association as much as we could. We're very familiar with the lobbyists from the UEN, for example. We have very seldom used the lobbyists from the Iowa School Board Association. I think we need to think about both and have both work with us and close with this board. And just to follow up with your comment, President Johansson, it's both rural and urban districts that are in this situation. We also have urban districts that are at the top also, and we have rural districts who are at the top and the bottom. So it's a mixture across the state of Iowa. It's not just districts like us in Davenport.
Very good. Thank you. Any additional discussion? Okay, we'll call for the vote. Just make sure I'm on the right page here. Director Crumwitty.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director DeFau.
Yes.
Director Hayes.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion regarding approval of annual membership to the Urban Education Network?
Mr. President,
Director Hayes.
I recommend that the board approve annual membership to the Urban Education Network for $8,500.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Director Kluhl?
I'll just say, in reference to my previous comment on IASB, the Urban Education Network is a group of the originally 8 largest districts in the state of Iowa who found that they needed additional legislative presence than what IASB was able to provide them. So they created the 8 largest districts. Subsequent to that, they have started in the last several years to add somewhat smaller districts. I think we're up to about 17 districts now involved with the Urban Education Network. But I just want to say that our $8,500 that we paid last year, we used their resources to double that amount, I'm sure. Their lobbyist, Margaret Buckton, has supported us in ways that we could not have communicated with our legislators the way that we did without her assistance. She's there at the Capitol day in, day out, and she knows how the system works, and she guided us on our journey and continues to do that. So this is money very well spent by the board.
Thank you. Any additional discussion? Okay. Oh, Director Dickman, or Director Snyder, did you have something?
No, sir.
Okay. We'll call for the vote. Director Hayes.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director DeFau.
Yes.
Director Crumwoody.
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion regarding approval of salary and benefits package for non-administrative, non-bargaining staff?
Mr. President,
Director Snyder.
I move that the board accept the administration's recommendation to approve the proposed salary and benefits package for the Davenport Community School District non-administrative, non-bargaining employees for the 2015-16 school year as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Director Dickman.
I'll start us off here. I have concerns that our resources are not growing at the same rate as our expenditures. I also think that we are not doing enough to address the inequality between our lowest paid employees and our highest paid employees. But at the same time, I think that what we are voting on right now addresses our most immediate concerns, so I will support it.
Thank you. Any additional discussion? Okay, we'll call for the vote. Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Hayes.
Yes.
Director Crumwoody.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director DeFau.
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion regarding approval of purchase and sale agreement for Palmer Shop Building?
Mr. President,
Director Kluhl.
I move that the board authorize final negotiations and enter into a final contract not to exceed $235,000 to acquire the property located at 1211 Harrison Street for the purpose of relocating the auto shop from Central High School.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
Mr. President,
Director Kluhl.
just a question. Just my curiosity, there are a couple of the items here that were requested by the city, and the city has offered to reimburse the district for those costs. Is that normal process?
That's on the earlier change order
Yeah.
discussion. Yes, sir. That frequently happens. For instance, when we're making a storm sewer connection, the city may want the manhole increased larger than is required for our particular development, and they'll say, if you'll have your contractor change that, we'll pay the difference. That happens with some regularity.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional discussion? Okay, we'll call for the vote. Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Crumwoody.
Yes.
Director Hayes.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director DeFau.
No.
And my vote is yes. The motion carries. To clarify something, Director DeFau, you asked for me to change the agenda on policy, and I don't recall which ones you wanted to change.
The discussion items,
Okay.
not
All right.
approval.
Great, thank you.
They've already been removed.
Okay, great, thank you. May I have a motion regarding approval of policy?
Mr. President,
Director DeFau.
I move that the board accept the policy committee's recommendation and approve policy 80301, development of policy.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Director Kluhl.
I appreciate the policy committee's work on my previous request in regards to the statement that the board is committed to examining policy and practices through the framework of poverty to aid in decision-making that is equitable for all students. I still am concerned on a couple of levels. My vote will be no for this approval of this policy. I'm concerned when we look at something through a framework. It reminds me of Aldous Huxley, who wrote a book called The Doors of Perception. And when he would go out, he would wear a pair of glasses colored to suit his mood. And when we look at things through a framework, we're talking about a framework, a pair of glasses. We're looking at policy then, and this is the board's policy on policy. We're looking at it then through a framework of poverty. And that a framework of poverty is kind of dark versus a framework of abundance. In addition to that, aside from the fact that the framework, I think, is rather dark, it is the priority that the board set. We're going to focus on issues of poverty, and we're going to focus on climate in our schools. And I understand that. But I'm wondering about the framework of perhaps sexual equity. What about the framework of racial diversity? What about all the other frameworks there are? There are so many frameworks out there. But when we say in our singular policy on policy that we will look at all policies through the single framework of poverty, that concerns me. It seems limiting, and I realize that on the board I represent probably a single vision of how this is read, but to me, this places our board in a position of looking at life through a vision, through a framework of poverty, when I think what we should be looking at is our district through a framework of abundance. So I'll leave it at that. I'm not trying to persuade the board or the policy committee. I just want to make sure that the board understands why my vote will be no for this policy.
Any additional discussion? Director DeFau.
And I'm not trying to persuade either. I'll preface with that. But I do believe that you're inserting a word into this policy that isn't present, and that's the word singular. And nowhere in this policy do I read that the board is committed to examining policy and practices only through the framework of poverty or singularly through the framework of poverty. And it is certainly not the intention of the policy committee to present this as a limiting manner in which to evaluate policy. It is, however, what I believe was the direction of this board as a whole that said we want to prioritize our work on limiting the effects of poverty on our students and families, and the place to start that is through our policies. And as a result, that's why the policy committee took this on, and that's why we landed with the language that we did. And we did attempt to make accommodations to your concerns that were expressed at the last meeting. And certainly you're within your purview to vote yes or no as you see fit.
I appreciate the efforts of the policy committee. But the board also set a priority of happiness. What about the framework of happiness? I see the framework of poverty. Happiness is not mentioned.
And I do not believe that was the direction of the board.
But it is a priority of the board.
That it is.
The issue of singularity, when you say the board is committed to examining policy and practices through the framework of poverty, that to me establishes singularity. Maybe that's just me.
Any additional discussion? Well, I've got to weigh in on this. This is really important. And I was thinking about President Johnson when he was talking about getting rid of poverty. And that was quite a while ago. And I think it's something when we look at what's going on in our community and we look at our free and reduced lunch rates and we think about the effects of poverty on our students and on our community. And I believe in this. And one of the things that I have seen through Director Sherwood's efforts and Director Crumwitty's efforts and some of our committee's efforts and some of the leadership of those committees is that board policy is one of the places where maybe we can make a difference. And the difficulty as we who are on the policy committee, there's quite a bit of work involved, and we have specific requirements to review some of these policies and to try and work our way through all of our policies and determine which ones would be applicable, wouldn't be applicable. How do our policies affect students? How do we affect poverty? I think is a very challenging thing to do. But if the policy committee has this kind of thinking as it goes into policy review and policy development, I think it at least gives us a chance to make that difference. And so even though we do have the other priority, it wasn't part of the board's direction the way that I understood it. And in fact, I think the idea here came from the administration that if we put this into policy, it would help us, the board, in reviewing our policies and look at it from that direction. And I think it's a really nice approach to help us think a little bit better. Any additional discussion? Okay, we'll call for the vote. Director DeFoe.
Yes.
Director Hayes.
Yes.
Director Crumwitty.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
No.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll move on to the Achievement Gap Action Plan. Superintendent Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the last few years, and especially last year, we've identified that one of our major challenges is to close the achievement gap. We want all students to get better. We push hard to do that, but at the same time, there are certain students that, because of situations which they aren't necessarily responsible for, don't do as well, especially when we're talking about the Iowa assessment. So I was challenged last year to come up with a plan, an action plan that would begin to approach the achievement gap. So I wish you'd indulge me as I'd like to go through this plan, because this is a committee of about 40 people, and when we met, there was usually about 25 present. Very smart people, met every 2 weeks, and we spent a lot of time looking at the data for the district, and spent a lot of time, everybody would have different things they want to see in statistics. We'd bring it in, we'd analyze it, then we spent time looking at the barriers, and what this plan proposes is overcoming the barriers. The group did a lot of research, they did visits, we had webinars, they made calls, and what we have here is the best thinking and will result in a reduction of that achievement gap. So one of the major barriers that we had to deal with is the discipline issue, and we all understand that. So the actions are, we are going to become a PBIS in a Boys Town district, and as you know, we have a grant that's going to help us do that in the next 5 years. So one of the actions is to implement that plan, and we will be continuing with training for our district beginning this year until we have every district that is under a PBIS with a Boys Town as the intervention. We need to reduce the suspensions, because if you're not in school, you can't learn. And we're doing that by internal diversion programs in our intermediate and high schools. These are people we're going to hire whose job is to divert people from getting suspended in the first place, but if they are in fact suspended outside the school, that we have a way to keep them from going out of the school. They will in fact get training that will enable them to operate within the school system so they don't have to leave. This is critical. It's key. In fact, what we're going to do is actually just give our high schools, here's your quota. You will not suspend more than this. We have to deal with it somehow within the schools, and the diversion program is one way to do it. Number 3 is an external diversion program. Dr. Goldstein has a group from the community that's been meeting for several months, and we're trying to keep our students out of the juvenile court system and out of the police system. So they're coming up with ways to do this. In fact, Rob Scott is a member of a group which is representing Davenport, going to Georgetown for training that they give for communities, and then we'll come back and we'll have a community plan for diverting students from the juvenile justice system. And then we're going to have some pilot programs for restorative practices in our schools. So we're actually going to train people this summer for restorative practices, and they will go back to schools and implement them, because we see that as a way to, again, keep students from either getting into trouble or exacerbating their trouble so much they have to be suspended out of school. And the second goal talks about the barriers of tardiness and absences. We found a program called Attendance Works. We're going to implement that through our school system, so we have a committee that's going to get that executed and make sure that we have it in all of our schools. We have to bring policy recommendations to the board, just as the one you saw tonight. There's got to be policies which will help us with the tardiness and absences. We need to do it at the highest level. So we'll be studying that and then bringing you recommendations. And then we need to consider changes to the teacher contract, which will encourage teacher attendance. And so there's a lot of things that can be done, and I really believe that the DEA would like to help us do that, because it's got many favorable aspects. The third barrier was the specialized intervention program for the students in the gap. Who are these students that are caught in the achievement gap? And one, we have to identify those students, and secondly, as you know, the last 2 years we've had a district gap program. I've asked T.J. Schneckloth to look at that and see if that's the right program, or if we have to change it for the upcoming year. One of the major intervention programs that we're going to have for children who can't read is the third grade reading initiative. As you know, we have a summer coming up where they're going to have to go to school, or if not, they're not going to pass the third grade. And that's state law, so we're working on that initiative, and you've had reports about that in the past. Every GAP student needs to have a mentor, either internal to the school or an external mentor. And then we need expanded academic and enrichment programs for our GAP students. So we have a group working on that right away. Another barrier was cultural competence. This is a very difficult one, because we think we know what not having the competence looks like, but how do we to work on that in our district? As you know, Dr. Adamson's been working with us for 3 years. It'll be our 4th year next year. He's working with us, so we're not ignorant of it. We're not ignoring it, but we have to do more. So this group under Dr. Goldstone's leadership actually put together a cultural competence rubric for the district and for the school. And so what we're going to do is fine-tune that with field tests during the next year, and we're going to use that to, again, evaluate both the district and every school, and then make corrective actions based on the cultural competence rubric. We had a separate committee to ask about what could the community do to help schools with the cultural competence, and what we're doing is trying to locate 2 African-American community liaisons to serve from each school. And what they will do is advise teachers, administration, the principal, and work with students, work with families on anything that seems to be an issue that we just don't understand, or we're handling it incorrectly. So every liaison will be called upon to do something different at each school on any given day or week or during the year. But I think this will be a powerful thing to bring the community in a formal way into the school. So we've already started a system of getting people to apply, and they'll be selected through the summer. Provide support for the board poverty priority initiative. That certainly is one of the main things we need to do. We realized early on that customer service is one of our main issues when dealing with people in poverty, or perhaps parents who are unable to help their students with this achievement gap, or with just getting along in the school. So we've already trained our front office in all the schools as well as the ASC, and we're training the leadership, the principals, and the administrators just before school starts. And what we've put together is a rubric of what real good service looks like, acceptable service, and things that we can't tolerate. So that rubric will be used to test and make sure that we're providing good customer service. And then we want to ask the students what cultural competence looks like to them. And oddly enough, that was one of the last things we thought about. But by golly, they're the ones we serve, and they can identify it faster than we can. Another barrier has to do with instructional practices, because it is there that we succeed or don't succeed. So as you know, we're using the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching rubric, which is guiding our classroom practice. It's a very complicated rubric, but it was actually part of our grant for teacher leadership and compensation, and we said at that time we would follow this rubric. And what we're doing is studying it, we have training in it, and we're asking each school to pick a couple items out of that rubric and to really concentrate on that in their school. Continual support for the advancement via individual education. Remember, we had that at J.B. Young. We now have received money to add that to Sudlow Intermediate School and also Central High School. In fact, we had probably almost 20 people or more who went to San Diego last week and got trained in AVID. So we'll have 3 AVID programs in our school system, J.B. Young, Sudlow, that feed into Central. This is a great program, and it's going to be a game changer. We need to address the negative impacts of bidding on students in the gap. I've heard it over and over and over. It's the elephant in the room, and I'm going to challenge the board. We've got to do something about it. The district will continue to get us consultation, professional development, and our cultural competence in the district, and that will help with our instructional practice, because many times the issues of teachers not relating to students or vice versa has to do with some cultural competence issues. And then we hear over and over and over, we need to relate better to our students. And when I ask, where is the course to do that, we haven't found it yet, but it doesn't mean that we can't approach it. And one of the things we're doing, we have a video that's being made and will be shown to teachers next year. We've actually asked students to talk about what it is that they need from teachers and why there's this disconnect. And it's a very powerful video. And as soon as we get it finished, I'll certainly let you see that. And then, not a barrier, but something we need to do is to support the board, the impact on poverty initiatives, by doing whatever we need to support you. You just passed a policy about look at all decisions through the closing the gap and the how poverty impacts that, and certainly we will do that as an administration. And what we need to look about is closing the opportunity gap too, and by that I mean our tag courses, AP courses, music, art, sports, all those things. From time to time we've looked at it, but now we're going to actually look at that. So that's the action plan. You'll notice that there are responsible parties, there's timelines, and I will continue to keep you updated on where we're going, because these will make a difference. And later on, we talk about the budget, you'll see where I've had to include some additional budget items to accommodate these. So I'm open to any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Director Crumwitty.
Just a quick comment. I believe, Dr. Tate, you forgot the very last one, which is very important to me. The kindergarten, the preschool.
I did. I went past that, the last page. Thank you. And we added that as the last thing, too. We've been doing it, but they said, wait, that's part of it. And it is to increase the readiness, the number of 3- and 4-year-old students who attend preschool in the district. And to do that, we need to prioritize and decide what ones have to be in schools, actually located in schools, and if so, then you need to make decisions about the facilities and the structure. As you know, we're opening the Fillmore program, so we need to monitor that. And we have a early childhood working group that needs to continue. So thank you. Sorry I missed that one.
Any additional discussion or comments? Director Dickman.
Can you talk about why certain people were chosen for various responsibilities? Was it acclimation or experience?
Well, I could, but that's really my job.
Yeah.
I wouldn't rather. I mean, mostly I think you can see that executive directors are people that's their job. And by the way, they will pick a lot of other people to be with them. So these are just the nucleus of the group. These are committees they'll form.
Anything else? Director DeFau.
On page 1, item 2, on the development implementation of an internal diversion program, will that require new staff to be hired to accommodate that?
It does, and when I show you the budget, I'll show you the new staff, and we'll talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
Yes.
Very good. On, if I may continue.
Go ahead.
Okay. On the second page, item 3, consider changes to the teacher's contract which will encourage teacher attendance. What specifically do you mean in that regard?
Well, I think there could be monetary rewards for not using, I've seen it before, not using all of your vacation or your time off or whatever you get. So all kind of ways to do it, and I'm sure the DEA, because again, I get a feeling they're interested in this also. So I think we'll come up a lot of thoughts on that. But mainly it could be monetary incentive, but that monetary incentive saving us substitutes in some cases will actually net us savings.
Then on page 4, item 3, the community liaisons, will those be volunteers or will we be compensating those individuals?
These will be purely volunteers.
Okay. And I think it's great that you asked the students to give comment as to what they need from the building staff to feel connected, and I think that's great. Anything
else? Director Kluhl.
So then, I assume you'll be funding this out of the surplus money after the 1.25% in one-time money then this year?
Oddly enough, as Marcia will talk about, we can't use a lot of that money for some of these things. There's certainly, it's restricted, if we get it even. I mean, the governor's talking about vetoing.
Not a done deal.
Yeah, we're kind of restricted, but she'll cover that when we talk about the budget.
Well, I had a question on number 2, the first goal, reducing suspensions through the development of and implementation of internal diversion programs. You indicated then essentially that you would be establishing caps for the schools?
Yes.
Are you concerned about that in terms of having a standard for suspension? If now you establish a cap, what about those students that exceed the standard?
I don't know.
For suspension.
What do you mean exceed?
Well, I mean, there must be a standard for when you suspend a student.
Yes, we have a discipline matrix, so if they do this, then we suspend.
So then the cap will override the matrix?
Not really. We have already changed the matrix. We had the principals look at that, and there were many cases we were suspending far in excess of what the issue was. So we actually changed that. But that's our document we use. The point is, let's say that Art Tate, for cussing out a teacher, would normally get 3-day suspension. What the internal diversion program will do is, I may still go out for 1 day, but my next 2 days will be in the school with a certified teacher who is teaching me 2 things, my curriculum, but also how to cope, how to have social graces, how to relate to people without cussing them out. We also have the restorative practices, and one of the key things of restorative practices, which all these teachers are going to get training to, is to bring together the parties, which would be teacher and student. So there's just a lot of things going on. So it's not a matter we say, you know, you just can't go out for that. They still are being recognized for having done something dastardly, but it's going to be in school partly rather than out.
So if I have a cap of 10 at my high school and I have an 11th child who exceeds the standard set by the matrix,
If I tell you, take last year's, you had 100 suspensions last year. This year I don't expect to see more than 75. I mean, that's up to the principal. And it's been done in other districts. And I don't know any other way to do it. I'd like to just say, let's just work on it, but you've got to give them a pretty hard number, and they want a hard number. They do. But I've also told them, I have the job. I just can't tell you that if I'm not going to support you. So let's say I get a school that calls Rob and says, I'm at my 75%. What do? I have got to do this. I mean, we're going to be flexible with them. That's our job. I've got to support them in it. But I think we've got to have a hard and fast rule. And plus, what we're trying to do is cut down the percentage of minorities that this happens to. That we are way out of kilter with the percent of minorities suspended compared to their percent of the population. We can't accept that any longer. So we've got to work on that also simultaneously. Yeah. So it's a hard nut to crack, but I think this is a start.
It's not simple, and I recognize this is a start. I guess I'm concerned about setting an arbitrary number when, in fact, what we need to do is reduce the number of students, either if they're of color, of approaching that level in the matrix by which they need to be suspended. And I know that's part of the program as well.
It is.
It's just that when you say you have a hard cap, that concerns me a bit, but you're saying that there will be flexibility built into that. You have
There'll be supports.
You have hard standards.
Yeah.
And there will be supports.
Yes, and we'll see how it goes.
Okay, it's a start.
Any additional discussion? Director Dickman.
What are we, or how much are we doing in the way of pooling resources to make sure we're not reinventing the wheel, or if there's any funding savings we could use by various community groups that are like the Y or things like that are doing similar programs?
Well, I mean, the Y-ACES program is a critical program, but that's for people that have already been adjudicated.
Okay.
I don't know, and this, if we're talking about the diversion program, it has to be certified teachers. That's the whole point, at least the high school. It's not the intermediate schools. So it takes extra people. It's got to be extra people. So I don't know of any outside agencies. I mean, you notice later on we have the liaisons coming in. That's critical. So certainly we're trying to cap that. And Rob Scott going to this Georgetown training, the whole idea is to have a community safety net. And so we'll probably be depending upon that. And that includes the judges, the juvenile liaisons, the police. It's all of those. So certainly we'll be calling upon them to help us with some of the problems that we have with this. So I think you'll see we will be going to that well also.
Okay, I think it's more kind of alluded to, not necessarily specified, which is fine. I just wanted to make sure that we have that in the forefront of our mind, that we're not reinventing the wheel.
We are inventing, but I don't know anybody else doing it, so yeah.
Any additional discussion? Director Hayes.
Yes, on page 1, number 4 with the restorative practices, could you also discuss that a little bit more and include like the model sites that will be utilized?
We don't know who the model sites are going to be. Right now we're picking the people to go to the training. It's going to be done at the end of summer, and we're going to bring a trainer here, and we're looking at training between 20 and 25 people. So we've got some people right now taking other training, which has been arranged by the Decategorization Commission, and they've given us slots, and I think we've got maybe 10 or 12 people going to that. So I'm not sure who it will be, but what we want to do is certainly spread it out in the intermediate and high schools where we have the diversion program, and then try it at some elementary schools too. But I'll let you know once we pick that.
Anything else? Director Snyder.
I'm kind of intrigued by this diversion plan, and I think that's something fairly unique that you don't hear a lot of, and I think that has some pretty powerful potential. I think it has our administrators, especially giving them that hard number, kind of a motivation to use an intervention like this program versus just making them disappear for 2 or 3 days, because I don't think that necessarily helps the situations. In fact, in many cases, exacerbates them. But this diversion plan, I'm pretty excited about.
Well, let me talk a little bit more about it. I was saving it for the budget, but you can just see the numbers. So each high school would have a certified teacher who is a diversion teacher. And their job will be to bring together the assets of the school, which would be an attendance coach, which could be associate principals, which could be the security, and certainly could be the juvenile liaisons, juvenile justice liaisons. And the idea is to keep students from being suspended in the first place. So you know who you've got the list. You know who your troublemakers are. You know who can't control themselves, who liable to get in trouble. So the job of this teacher will be working with them, using restorative justice practices, also using other techniques to try to educate them about ways to get along in the school system. So they keep them from being suspended. But if they are suspended, then principals know they've got to use this diversion program to either keep them from going out in the first place or reduce the number of days that they have suspended. And again, it's education. They're not sitting in a room. They're not doing homework. It is not a study hall. It is getting their homework so we can count those days as being a day attending school. And also, as a sideline, they're working to get them back into the school, to the classroom, or to correct whatever it was that put them there in the first place. So, again, this idea came up with a bunch of us talking. We vetted it with the principals. We just need to give it a try, and we've actually we've posted those positions. Tomorrow we're posting them, so we'll see what we get. We're hoping we get people who are well trained and versed in dealing with at-risk students. That's the whole point. So yeah, we think it's exciting, and we'll see where it goes.
Anything else? Well, I have to say just a couple of things. One is, thank you very much. I think this is amazing. It's obvious that a ton of work went into the preparation of all of this and the organization. Another is that during your presentation and as I thought about all this, I had a sense of calm that the superintendent and the administration are really doing great things. And third, I wanted to say I happen to also be on a committee. It's a policy governance committee. And that committee talks about what the board's roles are and the superintendent and administrators' roles are and the interaction between them. And it's probably going to take a long time before we get to a point where we would be at a point that is much closer to policy governance. But I will say that I think about those things frequently, and it makes it a lot easier to say, yes, Superintendent Tate, this is what we've asked for, and you're doing a fine job. But that's what I say. Any other comments? Okay, we'll move on to the next item. This is a budget recap.
So, Marcia, why don't you start by telling us what we know from the state, what's the realm, the range of what we might expect, and exactly when.
Well, I only wish. What I can tell you that we know is really very little. I can tell you that Governor Branstad has not taken action on any of the bills that would affect our funding. What they have given us is what has been proposed and is what is pending before him. And so I'll point out a couple of things that relate to the district. Senate File 171 and 172 establishes a 1.25% supplemental state aid rate, and we certified our budget at 0%. Really, that has very little impact for us because of our decline in enrollment. Basically, what it does is it shifts money from our budget guarantee to funding. So we're not going to see any additional dollars because of the 1.25%. I had shared with the board earlier, it would have to be above 2% for us to get out of budget guarantee. So now it's just a matter of, instead of it being budget guarantee, it could be supplemental state aid. The amount of dollars does not change. Senate File 510, there was an increase in the amount that the AEAs are being reduced. That doesn't impact us except for the flow-through dollars that come through us. But they were given an additional $532,000 reduction in their budget for the AEA for next year. Senate File 510 also eliminated the state aid for the instructional support program, and that is for 2016 and 2017. And the impact to the district is a loss in funding of $515,000. They haven't funded it for the past couple of years, so that's not anything that was of a surprise. But what is a surprise is that they did set it for 2 years, so we know that for 2 years there will be no state aid funding. House File 666 is what sets the miscellaneous one-time state aid payment, and that is $1.7 million. There are restrictions that come with that, and that is it's for instructional expenditures that include textbooks, library books, other instructional materials and equipment used by students, transportation costs, educational initiatives that increase student achievement in grades PK to 12. And of course we could use it to replace the all or a portion of our budget guarantee, but by doing that we would lose spending authority, so that's not even an option that I would want to entertain. So again, that's one-time funding, but it comes with strings attached. The net result of what we know are changes to our funding and spending authority. We're going to gain a little bit over $1 million in spending authority. Of this amount, $1.7 million is state aid. $656,000 is a reduction in state property tax, and so our tax levy is actually going to be going down by 16 cents as a result of the proposal that's before the governor. And again, the information that we received from the state in bold letters going across the middle of the memo was none of this has been signed. And that's what we know.
Thank you. Before I get to the particulars, any questions or comments about the general funding situation from the state? Or does anybody know something we don't?
Anybody? I have a question. That 16 cents, you were talking so fast. I didn't quite understand that.
Our property tax levy is going down by 16 cents as a result of the changes in funding that are taking place. And so that's kind of out of our hands. State aid is actually going up by $1.7 million, but the property tax is going down. And I'd say that probably the biggest impact of that is because of our budget guarantee. Because when we go into budget guarantee, that's all property tax funded. But because they set the supplemental state aid at 1.25%, a portion of that now goes into the state formula where the state aid picks up part of it and it relieves the property tax. And so that, I would say that's probably the biggest contributor as to why our property tax levy is going down.
So the interaction of all these, and I'm going to have to look at the particulars later, but the $1.7 million hasn't been approved yet, right?
Correct.
The 1.25% and the budget guarantee and the one-time funding are all related, and the decrease in property tax, you're saying is automatic because of the way things are going to happen.
Correct.
And when that happens, is that a one-year change? I don't understand how that would apply then in future years.
It wouldn't necessarily. That would be a change to the formula for this year. Next year, the property tax rate could go up or down depending on basically what the supplemental state aid percentage is going to be set at.
So are we going to give the governor credit for lowering property taxes?
I can't answer that.
All right. I have no other questions on this. Director Dickman.
On the end of your note there, can we also give him credit for shortchanging Iowa education? But on my actual question, so I think it was the House Bill 240 stated that we could not increase our levy to make up the reserve fund. But since it's being lowered by factors out of our control, does that mean that we will be 16 cents lower, that we can't go back up that amount for next year?
I believe the only way that we could
If that happened.
that we could go back up would be to increase the amount that we levy in cash reserve.
Okay.
But since we had already published it at a stated amount, we don't have that opportunity now to go back and increase it.
No, I mean, like, for future years,
Oh.
if somehow magically they had passed 240, would that 16 cents mean that we couldn't go back up now?
Yeah, I understand what you're asking, and I can't answer that. I don't know.
Okay. Well, luckily they didn't pass it anyway.
Any additional discussion? All right, Superintendent Tate.
Thank you. For the operational part of the budget, I want to remind you, let's go back 4 years when we were looking at between $3 to $5 million reduction every year because we were aiming at having an unspent balance of $8 million. I went back to confirm with Marcia that the assumption we were using was that the minimum we would be getting each of those years was 3%. So you need to know that the need to reduce has not gone away. Even with me saying I'm going to at least value our students at $175 more than what the state gives, we still have the issue of Davenport going years doing what was right for students, but with a reduced enrollment that we were just overspending for the right reasons. And we got to the point where, again, we were looking $3 to $5 million reduction every year. And in March, when I made my statement, I said we'll continue to take the reductions of early retirement, and our estimate is $825,000. Utility savings about $100,000. I think that'll be more with our 4-day weeks, but not sure. We had a maintenance contract that we were putting to the management fund of $50,000 savings. Professional development of $190,000 by having a moratorium on students out of the classroom for training, and transfers to different fund sources that saved us $240,000. So that's all the savings which we're getting next year, at least on paper. And again, things can change. It could be more. Hopefully it wouldn't be less. The reductions that we did not take when I put the stake in the ground, we were looking at increased class size and reducing 25 teacher positions. We had curriculum specialists and academic coaching positions on the list. Departmental operational budgets, which had been reduced for the last 4 or 5 years, were taken off. We had associate principals looking at reduction. That was taking off. And combining school leadership positions, at least for the time being, taken off. We have a moratorium to try to work through this inequality. Here's what I'm adding for this year. We talked about the diversion programs. We're adding 4.0 FTE teachers, and that will be for the high schools and J.B. Young. We're going to add another math coach. You're getting explanation about Iowa assessments in August, but we had people sit down, and we have an issue with math, and that's generally in the elementary school, so I've added another math coach because we prove that makes a difference. We're adding an FTE reading interventionist because we've never had one for intermediate schools. We will show that we have some slippage of reading there, and we know that intervention works because we have the data to show it. So I'm adding a reading interventionist for the intermediate schools. The achievement gap plan that I showed you, I'm adding $40,000 for that because there is training that we have to do for that, all of those action plans. Creative arts transportation and creative arts operations. We need to begin to make some investments from the district into those, and those are some shortages which we've come up with this year. We've gotten great support. We have good money that we've received from foundations, but we need to realize that dries up eventually. Those are 3-year investments, so we need to get used to, if we think that's an important program, to begin to put something into it. So that's a total of $722,000. So I said that I was going to spend up to $175. That would be about 2.7 million. We're certainly not nearly there, but what we've done is those reductions not taken and those additions certainly provide begin to use that kind of money. So what does this mean to us? Because we're all culpable. We all have to realize what's happening to the district. And we look at scenario number A. If we get the allowable growth and the 1.7 million for the one time, and if we expend up to $175 per student, which is 2.7 million, then a year from now, June 30th, we'd be having unspent balance of between about 400,000 and 2 million. If we continued to spend the way we are and with no savings at all, the year after, we'd be 9 million to 11 million into our reserve fund. That's not something we want to do. We were looking at a reserve fund of 30 million and talking about, gee, if the state owes us 2.7 or 3 million a year, we could go for 10 years. So that's something is what we would probably look at. And I only present that to you because we still need to be prudent. We still need to look for savings. We're going to bring you a long-range facility plan which shows you how we can save money and how we can expend money the most usefully for our facilities. So I just want to point out to everybody, we're not going in the hole like that. We can't do that. We still have to be prudent, but we can do it while still spending the state-allowed money plus $175 per student, because that's what they deserve. The second scenario is that if I didn't add the 175, if I just said, well, we'll just take whatever the state gives us, then you can see in a year from now we'd have about 3 million unspent, but we'd still be down 5 million. So again, it's that old that we knew we needed to save in order to increase our unspent balance, and what we need to do now is just be prudent, and we need to continue to pressure the state to get what is owed our students, and then we'll be okay.
Any questions or comments for the superintendent? I can't hardly imagine that nobody has something to say about this. Well, I'll start then. When I think about all of this, and I think about the superintendent's earlier report, and I think about the upcoming election, and as the superintendent said, we have to be prudent. And when you look at those, or especially that bottom number, the negative $5.8 million, and I think about the future boards, and that we have to do what's right. I am confident in our legislature that it can do the right thing and it can make these changes. But I think about all of the things we have to get the whole state of Iowa on board that this is the right thing. And it's a very, very difficult thing to get everybody involved. It's difficult to get other districts, other boards, other superintendents, other people in the communities, Farm Bureau, other businesses, business organizations. And I think that if we could get all that done during the summer, it might make a difference to the legislature. And I'm really hopeful that we can get everything completed. Other than that, I appreciate all the work that's been done to get us to this point. Thank you. Any additional discussion? Director Kluhl.
Well, you've moved from disillusionment to hopeful in one session of the board. I have trouble keeping up with you sometimes. Well, it's a dire report. Every time we get this report, it seems a bit worse. And our ability to communicate with the legislature, which holds the purse strings, has not done what we had hoped. And I think that we will continue to pursue. I don't think all of our legislative opportunities have been played out yet. I believe that there are still things we can do. We are building some momentum. We're building a coalition. We're going to be working with IASB in a way that we haven't. We're going to start our first legislative advocacy committee is next month. We're going to start strategizing how to move forward. We will have a strategic plan to move forward. But frankly, if we can't show this budget recap to our legislators and have them say something's wrong, then at that point I will no longer be hopeful. So somehow we have to be better communicators, and it's up to us. It's like the Lorax, you know. The Lorax said, "I'll speak for the trees," because they cannot speak for themselves. We'll speak for our kids. We need to, because if we don't, and if we don't do an adequate job of it, our kids will suffer. So it's up to this board. It's up to the board that's coming in. I feel badly that we are leaving this legacy, but we will not. We will not be satisfied. And I guess we shall overcome someday. You know, I was thinking of Martin Luther King. I was thinking of the statement he said. He said, you know, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think ultimately we will prevail with this. We have to, because it's morally right. It's the right thing to do. Simply. I understand property tax. I understand the concerns, but there's a right thing to do.
Any additional discussion? All right, very good. Thank you for the presentation. We'll move to the instructional support levy.
Good evening. I've just got a couple slides here that I wanted to share with you that talk about the instructional support levy. The instructional support levy, our current levy, is set to expire in 2017, and we have had it in the district since 1994-95. We currently have it set at 10% of district cost, which is the maximum amount that we can set it at. For fiscal year 15, that's bringing in $7.1 million. We have it set at the maximum number of years that we can get through board approval, which is at 5. We could go to 10 years if we wanted to take this issue to the voters, but typically we have left it at the board level and just gone for the 5 years. It is funded by property taxes, and in the fiscal 15 levy, it makes up $1.69 of our property tax levy. And the uses of funds, it can be used for any general fund purpose, but it cannot supplant dropout funding, talented and gifted funding, or support the special ed deficit. And it also cannot supplant any uses that we would use PEPL or the management fund for. I found this interesting when I was going back to look at the history of the levy. In 1989, House File 535, the School and Area Education Agency Act became effective, and it was to provide major changes in the state financial law for school funding. The revised formula was supposed to equalize per pupil spending, which I thought was ironic, provide for phantom students, increase property tax relief, and provide for increase in local discretion. However, as a result of this bill, or this House file, it actually generated less money for many school districts than the old funding method would have done, which of course included Davenport. So what they did is they provided a new method to generate additional funding, which was the inception of the instructional support levy. However, the history of the funding. In 1991-92, it became effective. In 1993, the funding was capped, so it ran a whole 2 years before they capped the funding. And what that meant was through 2011, as more districts participated, the state reduced their contribution because they had a set pot of money. And as more districts came in, that meant your share of the pot became less and less. So what they did is they reduced what the state contribution was to the instructional support levy. In fiscal year 2010, they actually used ERA funding in lieu of the state aid. In 2011, then they shifted and they used school infrastructure funds in lieu of state aid. And then in 2012, they eliminated the state aid contribution towards the funding altogether. The instructional support levy was proposed to provide districts a method to assure adequate funding. And again, unfortunately, the new funding mechanism was fully funded for only 2 years. And so rather than having adequate funding, it gave us less funding than what was originally intended. So what we're proposing is that we renew the levy, and what that would take is the discussion questions that you have tonight. On July 13th, ask that you pass a resolution of intent to participate in the instructional support levy, and that would go from fiscal year 17-18 through 21-22. And then on August 10th, we would have a public hearing, and then ask that you pass a resolution to participate in the instructional support levy. And if we have not heard any negative comments or received petitions to the contrary, then by September 8th we can certify to the state that we would like to have the instructional support levy for an additional 5 years. Can I answer any questions?
Anyone? All right. Well, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
We're well under 2 hours for our meeting. I thought I'd point that out before we go to the last.
We're not finished.
No, but we're getting close. All right. Next up is, is a discussion on policies. Director DeFau, would you lead us in that, please?
I will, and I would note significantly under is 13 minutes. So, that being said, if I may, I'd like to flip-flop the policies and address 50116 first, because I think it'll require the least amount of conversation. Open enrollment between districts is the policy. And you may recall that we revisited this about a year ago when some of our schools were switched so that all of the students were eligible for free and reduced lunch. And we did not have that language, or we didn't have that marker anymore as a way to determine whether or not you were category A or B student as it related to the diversity plan. So we made a change to the diversity plan language. However, we failed to make that same change in the open enrollment between district policy. And so you'll note that in the third paragraph, there's a reference to a student will be placed into one of two categories, A or B, based upon key demographic characteristics, specifically student academic performance and free and reduced lunch eligibility, or fee waiver eligibility based upon the household economic survey. And you may recall I believe the last board meeting, in fact, we had some conversation about the household economic survey and how all of our families were going to be asked to complete that survey on an annual basis. Correct, Dr. Tate? Yes. So that we would have access to that information for all students. And I'll open that for questions. or comment? Director Kluhl.
I think it's ironic that you chose this as the policy that would have the least discussion. The Agenda Committee put together about 4 or 5 items that they thought that they would like to see the current board address before the elections this fall because of the balance. Some of the senior membership on the board would like to have their input on, and this is one of the policies that we picked out, saying this is something we ought to take a look at. And we, at the last, what was it, month ago, when we voted on open enrollment students opting out of the district, we had 3 board members who felt that the current policy did not adequately reflect the needs of the students. So I was hoping that we would have discussion, especially from those 3 board members. Remember, we had the student and family who you felt should be excluded from the policy. So I thought this might be a good opportunity to have that discussion, because if we need to change this policy, now would be the appropriate time to discuss it.
And my initial thought is that what this is intended to be is a modest change in language to accommodate what is our current practice, and that if it was the decision or choice of the board or agenda committee to take a different look at this policy as a whole and whether or not it's meeting the district's needs, I think there's a whole nother conversation that needs to occur. There needs to be information collected by the administration in order for us to have a very thoughtful conversation about alternatives. So what I would like to suggest is that for the purpose of making sure our policy is congruent with our practice and that we are meeting the immediate needs of the diversity plan, that we could make this change and then have that other discussion. But that's my opinion. Director Dickman.
I was the one who proposed, but that was not my intention to open the open enrollment plan. That was my intention to make an exception, not change the rule, so to speak. If that is something that you would like to open, that is your option to do so. But I was not advocating for that. I think that this modest change addresses something that came up as a result of a different change that we had made, and that we want to make sure that we get this done in a timely manner so that it can be reviewed by all the relevant bodies to make sure that our policy is functional.
Other comments?
The remedy to policies which you feel exceptions should be made to is to change the policy. I don't believe we're in the mode of making exceptions to policy, but if we do have a policy that doesn't adequately reflect the desires of the board, you know, it certainly could be a much larger discussion, and I thought it would be. But if there's no concern on the part, I would like to get a sense from the board members whether we should proceed with a larger discussion. I myself, you know, was part of the board that developed this policy, and I find it odious. Every year we have to make this decision. I sit here and I think you used the words, you cringe. What was the word? It's terrible to sit here and tell students and parents that they cannot go to the school that they feel best meets their needs, because we have a policy that prohibits that. And it's based on the needs of our district at the time when we wrote this. I personally believe that it's still required as a policy. I think that time is coming, I think rather shortly, when we will no longer need this policy. I think that students will be able to opt out, because I think we'll have more students opting in than out. But that is not the case today. And so if the board does not feel the need for further discussion on this policy, I do not myself. But I would like to have a sense on the agenda committee's part whether a larger discussion is the desire of the board.
And this is the first that I believe the policy committee has become aware that the agenda committee was going to make such a request. Has certainly had not been brought to my attention in any manner. Would someone else from the agenda committee care to chime in on that one? Please.
So I don't recall, I mean, I'm on both of those committees, and I think it is very important to address the issue that has been brought to us tonight and to make this change so that we are congruent with our diversity plan. And that diversity plan we've worked on for years. And we've made modifications based on all sorts of things. For that purpose, I hope that we can pass this soon. The larger issue, I believe that Director Kluhl and I have talked, but not as part of the agenda committee. I think it's been separate, and talked more philosophically about the diversity plan, actually, that the diversity plan and the open enrollment are so intertwined. And there are some philosophical issues that I think are important to address. I'd like the discussion, but I don't recall it being part of the agenda committee's discussion. I recall it as separate discussion. And so at some time appropriate, if the board, if they want to have that discussion, it'll be a very interesting discussion. But it will probably be a very, very big discussion. So when the board has some time and inclination, I'd encourage it.
So it would seem to me the appropriate next step would be for someone to fill out a board request for an agenda item so that it could be brought to the agenda committee, which in turn could bring it to the policy committee. Would that be the appropriate next step?
Yes, if somebody wants to do that.
Okay. So, and I do not believe that this decision before us this evening is predicated on having that larger conversation. Like I said, there are two separate issues. The second one is much larger, and again, none of us are in the position this evening to give, except perhaps you, thoughtful alternatives to what is the current diversity plan and open enrollment policy. So I would, again, like to suggest that we are able to bring this forward at the next meeting to vote on this modest change. And then if you would like to bring it forward for discussion and it's the consensus of the board, I would, obviously support that as at the direction of the board.
Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of the efficiency of the board's time. And from what I'm hearing from the board, there is no desire for the agenda committee to bring this forward as an item unless we get an agenda request. So, like I said, I myself am satisfied with the policy as it exists. I would vote to approve it as is at this point in time. So,
any other comments regarding this policy? Okay. So then moving backwards, the second policy is 60506, Internet Appropriate Use. And this policy was reviewed by Gary Sloat and other members of his team. We invited them in at our last policy committee meeting to have some conversation about the Internet Appropriate Use policy and are bringing this forward for discussion and later vote at a next regular board meeting pending changes or concerns. So comments or questions?
well, sure. Yeah. And I really do. I feel like a nitpicker here, but I do have concerns. And I think sometimes I find myself on a different wavelength and 6/7 of the board. But my concern is the second sentence in the first paragraph, which says that access to the internet is a privilege and not a right. That to me seems very 20th century. I suspect there's a student out there that would challenge his free speech opportunity, saying that the internet was a communication opportunity that was being denied. Tinker versus Des Moines School District. The schoolhouse door is not a door preventing free expression. So has the policy committee talked about the issue of free speech and that statement?
Would someone else on the policy committee care to speak to that issue? Director Dickman.
I don't think that that specific topic did come up as far as I'm aware. I think that perhaps a little wording of, let me lost my place here, that access to the internet is, while in school, is a privilege and not a right. You know, the ability to use school hardware or school software, for that matter, is a privilege earned, in my opinion. But if it would please Director Kluel, we could refer it back to the committee to have further discussions on whether or not denying access in school based on behavior is acceptable.
Yeah, I think that would be a real interesting discussion for the policy committee. I think I looked at this a little bit. I don't think the Supreme Court has addressed it for over 18 years, which is unfortunate. But there are precedents out there, and when this policy was originally written, there was no understanding of the level of communication that would be going on in our community today. And so I think it bears looking at. If for no other reason, then we're working now on internet and digital opportunities, and Dr. Tate has come out very strongly addressing this with staff, saying let's think big, let's think out of the box. This to me is get back in the box. So I think it'd be a great opportunity for the policy committee to research this and see if they are still comfortable with that statement. I personally am not.
Director Snyder.
We can always count on Director Kluel to jump in and make us think about things we hadn't thought of. I will actually, I take kind of I think this is a whole nother topic for a whole nother discussion, but I still see it as a privilege and not as a right, because it's something you have to pay for. If it was given to all of us at no cost and told to use, then it is our right to use it. But it's still, because it becomes with a fee to use in most walks of life, I still consider that to be a privilege. So I guess that's how I define it. But again, that's part of what I think would be a very long and tedious conversation to grasp one sentence. I'm not sure if that's really worth our time and effort, but I don't know.
Well, I want to go on record as supporting any student that would wish to bring this to the policy committee as an issue. If you're listening, text me.
Dr. Tate.
Use of school devices to access the internet is a privilege. It really is. If someone is using it incorrectly, you're not going to use it. Now, can they go out to the classroom and use their iPhone? Yep. We can't prevent that. But use of school, we've got to have that right, because there are people who abuse it.
And not to get into a long-winded discussion, but that gets back to looking at things through the framework of poverty. Let's look at through the framework of abundance. Look at what goes on at the Creative Arts Academy, where you've seen kids with their personal devices, using them productively. And I'll bet you they use school-provided devices productively too. Not in a way that might seem appropriate right off, but I bet if we looked into it, they're a lot more productive because of it. As you mentioned, when you're getting staff together, what do we know? We're old guys, but people like what's our student board member who was thinking out of the box was on, yeah, Luke and Bennett, thinking of things way different, and so I think it bears looking into. I'm not so concerned about the litigation, but I would like to think larger and quit putting people in boxes.
Well, and I respect your right to your opinion. I would say that this policy in no means limits a teacher's ability or authority to authorize the use of a personal electronic device in their classroom for instructional purposes. That is a permissible use of electronic devices in our stated policies regarding cell phone usage and other electronic devices. We are permissive in our policy statements in that regard. But I do believe, our district and our schools have a obligation to implement rules and regulations that are necessary to make sure that conduct is appropriate. And I believe in this case that is one of those policy statements. And it is a privilege. If you say, hey, it's a right, go for it. Access that internet anytime you want, for anything you want, anywhere you want, go for it. I'm sorry. Our students are students. We are responsible for, and there are times that we have to take steps to ensure proper conduct. Now, the people responsible for allowing access, and actually Gary Sloat, and it's unfortunate that, in a way, it's unfortunate this policy is on here tonight for discussion, because Gary had offered to bring to us, and what we really thought people would have concerns is regarding the filters and what is allowed and what isn't allowed. And so Gary was going to prepare and present a list of all of the filters that are in place and what is limited. And he also wanted to stress that any teacher that wants to access a site that's blocked, all they have to do is make a phone call to their teacher librarian, who can then allow access to that site. Again, that we are trying to create an environment that is permissive and not prohibitive. And so I think that when this comes forward again, that we'll make sure that we have that information from Gary, because it'll be very important, I think, for people to fully understand where the limitations are. And he assured us that their first role, despite the limitations that are in place, is to support the teacher and give them the tools that they need to have an engaged classroom that does have access to the internet and other resources that may not be available to them otherwise. So it may be with a little more information you would be much more comfortable. But I have no compunction. As an adult, I instruct my children and set certain rules for them in order to guide them. And likewise, I think the school has responsibilities to establish rules and regulations to help guide conduct of our students. And it is a safety issue in some regards. Yes, President Johansson.
So a couple of things, and certainly the policy committee is going to be looking at it anyway. And I would appreciate if Director Kluhl, if you had access to that.
It's on the internet.
I understand, but I didn't.
You can access it.
I know, but I don't know even what you were referencing. And if you could send that to the policy committee, I'd sure appreciate it, because I'm not going to go to the internet and look for things that are in opposition to our policy. But another part of this is that in the legal references, it cites the Children's Internet Protection Act, 47 U.S.C. 254H, Iowa Code 279.8, 1995, IASB. And we did not look at those legal references specifically, but my guess is that those organizations have acted to make sure that we do protect children's interests. And when Gary Sloat talked about this particular policy, in fact, we had spirited debate because the appropriate use of the internet policy has been very restrictive. Down towards the bottom, you'll note that we talk about, it's in the last paragraph, we struck employees and students and put in users shall be instructed on the appropriate use, blah, 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 and users shall sign a form annually acknowledging they have read and understand the Internet Use Agreement and that they will comply with these provisions. To me, the statement that it's a privilege and not a right goes to one of those that I generally don't support, which is, I believe it's more philosophical than anything else. But I think the point is the next sentence, which is that this privilege may be suspended for violation of the policy or its related regulations. Anyway, the policy committee always appreciates those kinds of debates and looks forward to addressing your concerns.
I just want to make a quick comment. I think this is another good example of here we have a policy which IASB has documented. Should we not utilize IASB and asking about that policy, and all we have to do is pick up the phone and have that conversation. We also have an area education agency technology department that works with 22 different school districts in this AEA on these kinds of issues. Let's have a conversation with them. So I don't think, we have resources out there, and I just don't think we're using those kinds of resources to help us in making good decisions.
And I would caution that I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the administration would like to see any modifications made so that things can be rolled out for the beginning of the school year. If user agreements are going to have to be signed and things of that nature.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we'll, obviously this will be back on the agenda for the policy committee in July, but look for something sooner than later.
I guess the only thing missing from this conversation is beer in a dorm room. I don't want to carry it on too much longer, but I just felt the need to respond to your comments because I keep thinking about frameworks, and you're looking at this through the framework of permissive, and I want to look at it through the framework of empowerment and critical thinking skills. And if we continue to tell our children, exactly what they can do without empowering them to make decisions on their own, we don't send them out into the 21st century well equipped. And you're right. That may be personal, and it is. After all, everything that we're talking about here is personal, comes from within and our experience. So I will be glad to provide the policy committee with some background information, which I hope you'll be able to use profitably.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Unless someone else has other comments, I believe we're done with our policy this evening.
I'm certainly done.
Great. Well, it took a little longer than I had anticipated. But we'll move on. We just have a couple of other agenda items, administrative reports.
None.
Great. Are there any board requests? Nothing? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned.